I want to tell you a story I carry with me, like a small ember in the pocket, hot enough to burn through old fear, steady enough to light a way forward. It begins at high noon in a town called Ash Hollow, where the sun doesn't blink and people do. A 19-year-old girl named Gloria Nelson is tied to an auction post in the middle of the square. She's barefoot, the dust is hot. The sheriff lifts a whip because she dared to refuse a man twice her age, Grant Malden, the richest store owner in the valley, a man who thinks everything breaks if you press hard enough. The town watches. No one says her name. You know how a crowd can decide not to see you and somehow see you more? That's the kind of silence we're dealing with. The lash falls, and Gloria doesn't scream. Her spine is a line drawn in granite. She bleeds and she stands. In that moment, she isn't a scandal, or a warning, or somebody's property. She is a single sentence written in a language that town has forgotten. No. There's a reason public punishments have been used throughout history. They're meant to shrink a person down to the size of her fear. But sometimes, on very rare days, they do the opposite. When the crowd finally drifts home and talk turns back to wheats and weather, Gloria drags herself free. Her father, who has lost his wife and, piece by piece, the soft parts of his soul, refuses to look at her. He says what men say when they're afraid of a woman who won't kneel. You brought this on yourself. Have you ever heard a sentence that tries to fold you small and place you on a shelf like a broken thing? That's the one. Gloria crawls toward the tree line with no shoes, no water, no plan. The forest does not welcome her. Old pines whisper like judges in an ancient court. Her blouse sticks to torn skin. Each step is a small war between pain and will. She wedges herself into the hollow of an oak and asks the night for one thing: don't let them find me. What happens next is not mercy in the way movies stage it. It's quieter and more honest. A man named Ellen Crow, trap lines on his belt, a leather duster the color of ash, and a voice that moves like a river after snowmelt, finds her near dawn. He boils herbs that taste like bark and rain. He says, without ceremony, lie still. The wounds are deep. When she asked why he helped, he doesn't say because you're innocent, or because I'm good, or because the town is wrong. He says, because you didn't scream. He means, they broke your skin, not your spirit. He means, I saw the line you drew, and I respect the woman who drew it. Sometimes help isn't a rescue. It's a witness. Days pass. He keeps the fire. He replaces her bandages with moss and softened hide. He shows her how to listen for silence, because silence changes when danger enters the woods. He teaches her to wrap pain in bark tea and thyme. He hands her a small knife, not as a weapon yet, but as a weight. You should know how it feels in your palm, he says, and something inside her clicks. Not power, permission. Permission to live. I find myself wondering, as I think about Gloria, what tools we're handed in our own lives that are not about fighting, but about remembering who we are. A song that kept you upright. A friend who stayed on the line past midnight. A sentence you taped to your mirror. Keep going. What was your knife? Ellen is not a savior. He is a steady presence. He speaks in oaths, not promises. I don't leave what I've chosen to protect. Those words don't drape a cape over his shoulders. They set a boundary around hers. With him, she learns to read tracks, to step without snapping twigs, to cook rabbit with roots pulled from good earth. And one night, when the creek runs violet with dusk, he presses a small pendant into her palm. The carving is rough, deliberate. A new name. Sen. One who walks through fire and lives. Names matter. The wrong name can be a cage. The right one is a key you hang against your heart. Maybe you've worn a name that felt like somebody else's coat, expensive, ill-fitting, always slipping from your shoulders. Maybe you've stood in front of a door that wouldn't open until you called yourself by your true name out loud. What would you call the strongest version of you? When Malden's men come hunting, the forest holds its breath. Ellen slides into the trees, a shadow among shadows. He doesn't posture, he doesn't promise victory. He says only, don't run unless you choose it. If it comes to the worst,
make it yours. That is a brutal mercy, the truth that not choosing is how we're taken. Gloria, Sen, doesn't run. She waits behind rock and root, knuckles white around the knife. The men arrive with the lazy confidence of those who've never been denied. The first falls with a shout. The second staggers back, bleeding. The third limps away carrying a story. The woods are haunted by people who won't be owned. Sometimes the most strategic thing isn't to erase your enemies. It's to send them home with a rumor that grows teeth. It would be tidy, right here, to say the town changes because of one skirmish. But change never works on cue. Instead, Sen does something more radical. She goes back to Ash Hollow. She doesn't return like a storm. She doesn't gather a crowd or burn down Malden's store. She walks down Main Street in borrowed boots, a fur-trimmed cloak, the pendant at her throat beating like a second heart. She leaves a small pouch on a counter, an herb mix measured for Martha Whitlow's cough, and says, "Boil it with honey 3 times a day." She moves through the square where she once hung in the heat, touches the post that tried to keep her small. She does not spit on it. She does not cry. She claims it as a landmark on a map that now belongs to her. People stare. The barber removes his hat. The blacksmith's hammer stills midair. A mother snatches a child close. The sheriff comes to the door and for the first time looks small. Behind a curtained window, Malden watches and does not speak. Sen doesn't shout the truth. She lives it at full volume. It's a kind of power we underestimate, presence without performance.
If you've ever returned to the place that hurt you, not to beg, not to fight, but to be seen on your own terms, you know how a street can be both battlefield and altar. You set your feet down and the ground changes temperature. A town can keep its buildings and lose its permission to define you. That's what happens. People whisper a different story now. Not scandal, not pity. Legend. Out in the forest, Sen and Ellen build a cabin where the ground slopes soft and the water runs clean. They hang herbs to dry beneath the eaves. He carves small trinkets, animals, arrowheads, pendants, and leaves them near the bed she made from pine boughs. They speak more in glances than speeches. The lessons continue: how to move like you belong to the land, how to carry fear without letting it carry you. And then the last hounds arrive, 3 men with rifles and faces that have forgotten softness. They wait near the bend where Sen gathers mint. When the first boot snaps at twig, Sen pivots. She moves like someone who has decided, fully, to live. The knife sings. An arrow pins a pistol hand to cold air. The men back into the trees, dragging their arrogance behind them like a broken net. "Tell Malden," she says, voice made of stone smoothed by water. "If he sends another man, he won't get one back." Ellen adds one line that closes the door. "This ends when you stop trying to own what was never yours." I think here about how endings really work. They don't usually come with perfect justice. They arrive when the pursuit loses its claim on your life. Sometimes the person who harmed you never apologizes. Sometimes the town never says your name with pride. The ending isn't outside you. It's the moment you refuse to hand over your future for the price of your past. Years pass in the language of seasons. Elk migrate. Snow teaches the roof how to listen. Sen becomes a story parents tell their children at the edge of sleep. She doesn't walk like other women, a little girl says once. She walks like she knows the ground won't betray her. The whipping post disappears one night, burned, rumor says, by the very men who once defended it. The sheriff retires quietly. Malden sells his land and leaves without farewell. Power is like that, loud when it arrives, silent when it slips away. Notice what Sen does not do.
She doesn't campaign for a crown. She doesn't weld her name into iron over a doorway. She doesn't sit in the square and demand tribute. She plants herbs. She teaches whoever asks how to set a snare without hurting the forest. She becomes the kind of presence that makes cruelty look small and ridiculous. There's a difference between being feared and being undeniable. She chooses the latter. And then the town, a little at a time, chooses differently too. Not because they become saints, but because it's hard to ignore a future that keeps showing up at the market with medicine and a steady gaze. If you're listening to this and something in you has been misnamed, if you were told you were too much or too loud or too stubborn or too broken, there's a pendant I wish I could place against your skin. It would be carved with a word that doesn't need anyone's permission. Sen, one who walks through fire and lives.
The point isn't that pain makes you noble. Pain is just pain. The point is what you build after. Sen is not defined by the violence done to her. She is defined by the choices she makes in the long, ordinary days that follow. To learn, to tend, to return without begging, to defend when needed, to release when she can. That is how legends are actually made. One small, stubborn action at a time, repeated long enough to change the weather. Maybe the question isn't how do I get justice? Maybe it's what do I want my life to echo? If you go back to the square, go because you want to be seen by your own eyes. If you stay in the forest, stay because it is where your hands remember how to build. If you fight, let it be because love told you the truth at the fire. I don't leave what I've chosen to protect. And when the last chapter turns, it does not thunder, it glows. Sen and Ellen sit on the ridge while the valley drinks gold. He ages like stone, weathered, steady. She ages like flame, low, warm, unafraid. They tried to take everything, she says. And still you became everything, he answers. The forest doesn't echo. It listens, because it recognizes the sound of a person who kept walking. So if you're standing on broken ground today, hear me. You don't need the world to give you a name. You can carve your own. You can choose presence over performance, dignity over revenge, becoming over belonging to the wrong story. What name will you claim? Which square will you walk through? Which forest will teach you how to carry your fear without bowing to it? Gloria Nelson began as a girl tied to a post. Sen ends as a woman who rebuilt herself from ash and chose to live with her head unbowed. That's not mythology. That's a map. And if you need a line to lead you forward, take this one and keep it close. One who walks through fire and lives.